How's it going, everybody? This is Rusty here at FCP Euro, and today I'm going to show you guys how to replace the radiator in your G01 X3 M40i. Before we get started, you'll notice in this video I'll be referring to the high temperature circuit as well as the low temperature circuit. We'll be replacing the main radiator, which is technically the high temperature circuit, which takes care of most of the engine's cooling. The low temperature circuit is mainly for the vehicle's air-water intercooler that's built into the intake manifold. Although we'll be replacing the main radiator in this DIY, we will be going over the steps to remove and reinstall or replace your secondary or low temperature circuit radiator. Now on the table in front of me, we have the main radiator in this vehicle. We'll be replacing the main radiator hoses along with the radiator mounts, and the upper radiator does have some one-time use hardware. As you can see here, it does have some Loctite accompanied with the bolts. There is a couple of small little pieces of hardware which we'll be replacing along with the coolant for this job. You may need a little bit of extra coolant. As I said, this does have a split cooling system, and depending on how much the low temp circuit actually drains out, you may need a little bit more than we have here. Now, you may have a coolant leak in the front end of the vehicle ahead of the engine from either side of the bottom of the seams where the plastic meets the metal. Sometimes that can wear out and become basically brittle where the plastic and metal come together. If the vehicle has been in an accident previously, the radiator could be bent or warped, and that could slowly cause a coolant leak down the road as the radiator begins to go through heat cycling. As the vehicle also ages, you're collecting dirt, dust, and debris, and just the replacement of the radiator as the vehicle is aging can increase the cooling efficiency by about 10%. Now, along with the radiator being of age, we will be replacing the radiator hoses. As you know, the seals on the inside of these will begin to wear out, along with the plastic bits and all these cooling systems starting to become brittle. When we get the radiator hoses off, I'll show you on the inside, there'll be more of a brown or dark gray color on the inside of the hoses. Now that we've gone over everything on the table, let's get into some of the tools we need to take care of the job. Some of the tools we're going to need in today's DIY, not too many, but there are some specific things you're going to need. For starters, a 6mm socket, an 8mm socket, a 10mm socket, a 16mm socket, external Torx 14mm, a T30. Now for some more standard tools, I have a 3/8 torque wrench, a 1/4 inch ratchet, small pocket screwdriver, small pair of needle nose pliers, panel tool, 90-degree pick, a small straight angled 45-degree pick, a T20 screwdriver, a 1/4 inch as well as a 3/8 extension in a 3 to 4 inch and about an 8-inch length. You're definitely going to need this U-View coolant filling device or some sort of a device that's going to vacuum fill the cooling system. We are going to need a fairly long pry tool. I do have a smaller one here as well, but the extra length will make your job a lot easier in doing this radiator. Additionally, you're going to need a long radiator hose pick, a small little impact driver with a magnetic 8mm, which will be helpful for the belly pan screws. And then, as with most engine jobs, a couple or at least one very good bright flashlight will be handy to have in this DIY. With that, let's get into the job. Now, before we get started, we will be making quite a mess getting the coolant drain in this vehicle, so we're going to take off a lot of these lower belly panels, the center one here and both of the outside ones. The rear one is made out of like a foam material, and as you can see, it does absorb a lot of the oil and coolant from this vehicle when it is leaking, so we'll make sure to get that out of the way as well. There's a series of 8mm screws throughout these belly panels, and I do have a magnetic socket here, which will make getting these out a little bit easier as they are a very shallow bolt. All right, each one of these side panels does have 3 screws in the front here, and then we have 3 more on the inside of the fender liner. And now while we're down here, we're also going to be removing this lower cover on the coolant system here. Low temp circuit's underneath this cover, and the high temp circuit is just behind it. So there are a couple of clips here as well as on this end that you need to squeeze together with a pair of pliers, and then there are 2 more clips in the back here, and this whole cover should come down. So go ahead and squeeze this now, kind of get a finger underneath the trim panel while squeezing that to engage or disengage those clips. Moving across to that one, just kind of push them out of the way. There we go. And there probably is going to be a lot of dirt and stuff inside of there, as you can see there. Now, before we get started, we are going to be removing the DME, so we want to make sure that we disconnect the battery. So there are 2 little screws in the back here. Turn those 90 degrees, fold this flap back. We're just going to be disconnecting the negative terminal with a 10mm. Get that loose enough, tuck that out of the way. So with a small screwdriver or a pick, we can just latch the the trunk latch so that that doesn't close on us, or these trunk shocks fall down, and then we will not be able to get into the trunk very easily. With this here, you'd have to fold the seats down, and the back doors are more than likely locked. So just keep that all in mind. Latch this so that it doesn't close on you, just in case these do fall down. We do have a little 90-degree thumb screw that we have to take out here. Ours is missing, but on the passenger side, we do have that thumb screw here. Turn it 90 degrees, pull it up and away, and put these off to the side. Next up, we're going to be working on the fender trim as well as these front cowl trim pieces. Simply just lift this center dowel up and pull the rivet all the way out. And do the same thing for the rest of them. There are 2 more on the strut tower aside from the ones on the fender. All right, once we got those rivets out of there, we are missing one up here, but we want to take these out as well. Put this off to the side. You'll have some clips in the hood seal underneath here as well. And then the hood cable does run to the side here, so we will have to make sure that we pop this out. Careful not to break this. As you can see, it is a little bit resistant, but you want to make sure that we don't break these little triangular clips on the bottom of that little piece there. Once you get that out of the way, tip this up and pull it right out of the fender. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Now that we've got everything removed, we're going to start taking off some of these aluminum panels. We've also got to get these strut braces off, which are attached with a 16 up front and an E14 external Torx in the rear. Now moving on to this front aluminum panel, we have a series of T30s throughout, but we also have this hood cable that we just pop out of the panel, and we'll kind of work around that. Now once those have all come out, there are 2 posts that stick down in the radiator, so you'll want to lift somewhat straight up and then get it out of your way. Those posts will be right there. Now while we still have a T30 handy, there are 4 T30s in the front of this radiator support bracket, and we'll go ahead and get those out now. There is a couple of provisions for the harnesses and coolant hoses to fit underneath the bottom here, but it'll probably be a little bit easier if we loosen up these fasteners first and then kind of tip it back to release those connections. So keep in mind, once you release these 4 bolts on either side of here, you will still have some harnesses to release from that bracket before fully removing it from the car. Now on our vehicle, we already have the updated bolts with the Loctite that you saw on the table earlier. These are an E14. On your vehicle, if it hasn't been apart, it may still have a 13mm fastener here. And then, just like I had mentioned, we'll have a harness on this side, coolant hose right here, harness over here, back there, and then should be able to be removed nice and easily. Now we're going to go ahead and get the air box out of here. The little muffler on the air inlet is attached to the back of the box. We will have to get this small T20 out of the back here. And then we have a mass airflow sensor connector with the little white lock, which you should be very familiar with already. Unlock the lock, depress, and pop that out of the way. The clamp on this is going to be a 6mm, but you could certainly use a flathead screwdriver. And once you get that loosened up, just back that off and pull the air box straight up and away. Make sure that the pegs didn't break off and you have not released any of the grommets from the frame. If so, transfer them back over. It'll make installation a lot easier later. Next up, we'll be taking out the air inlet, and it is going to be a little bit difficult for you guys to see, but there is a clip that is located on the turbo inlet. So with a long radiator pick or a 90-degree pick, you're going to want to get down underneath and release that clip. You may even have to get from the top and bottom to try to get it out of the groove. And it may be easier if you just take it all the way out. There's also an electrical harness that is attached to the bottom here, and then we have a coolant hose in the provision here, as well as another one from the auxiliary water pump down below. So once you get that clip out, it should kind of wiggle out of place. You may have to put a little pressure going forward. And then once you get it out, we'll turn it a little bit. There's one more hose that we have to get off down below over here. We just need to squeeze and kind of wiggle it off all at the same time. There it goes. That is the little breather line that we were struggling on. Hopefully you were a little bit more successful than we were. I don't think we broke it, but it was definitely fighting us. So hopefully you have your coolant drain underneath the car, and we're gonna go ahead and pop the clip on the radiator hose on the passenger side. It's not really a lower radiator hose, but it is the radiator outlet. Once you get the clip popped out of its home, you should be able to wiggle the radiator hose until it releases and starts to drain. Like that. So we'll let that drain down, let that go slowly while we continue to work on the top of the car. We are going to release the couple of harnesses from this fan shroud to get the fan shroud out, as well as the coolant line here and then here. There's also a coolant fan connection right here, which we will release by pressing that connector in. And then also there is a temperature sensor of some sort on the side of the radiator here that is also connected to that harness. Similar to the mass airflow sensor, push the white lock back and then press it down and release. We'll tuck this out of our way. All right, now for the low temp circuit, there is another coolant hose right here. With a pick or panel tool, get under the clip. Careful, these small ones like to go flying and go missing, so try to release that and keep it handy. Same thing that we did with the lower radiator hose here, just kind of wiggle it off, and you may even want to spray a little bit of lubricant in between if it is fighting you. This hose right here is kind of tucked underneath this shroud. In order to release that, we will need to push this clip back slightly while pulling up on that as well. There's another clip in the center here. So there's a little clip right here, which you need to push in and just pull that cover up. That clip stays on that lower section. Now this other radiator hose connection is going to be a little tight, so we're going to put this down here and make sure we don't get too much of that coolant slung onto the headlight. The clip is going to be kind of hidden underneath the front here, but as long as you get something underneath that, we should be able to wiggle that out and away. And so that we do not lose that clip, I'm going to go ahead and pop that back into place. We can give ourselves a little more room by getting this guy out of there. Now before we go ahead and release the radiator fans, it looks like we're almost ready to go. However, there are two more connections on the bottom of the radiator fan where there is a coolant hose that is pressed in there. So I'm going to use a long panel tool and try to work this little clip out. There we go. And then there's one more on the driver's side. It is a little tight down there. Next up, we're going to be releasing the radiator fan from the radiator. There is clips on the top of here. You have to be a little bit careful. We are going to be replacing the radiator, so if you do break them, it's not the end of the world, but it is good to get familiar with these. So while prying the clip back, you will need to pull up on the radiator shroud enough to get past that clip there. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side of the radiator. Pull the radiator fans up and then slide this out. Careful of all the radiator hoses in here. We have another clip right there. And just like everything else, wiggle it off until it pops off. You'll notice the inside of here, that seal is starting to get fairly square, and the inside of the actual coupler is starting to discolor. So with about 80,000 miles, there's a good chance that this plastic is starting to break down, which is why it is good and recommended to replace the radiator hoses if you're replacing your radiator as well. All right, next we're gonna just move this radiator hose out of the way. It's kind of in this little groove underneath the throttle body. And then I'm gonna snake it back around, give us a little more room here. This lower hose should be stuck into that one as well. We can pop that out and give us a little more maneuverability. Next, we're gonna move on to this 10mm nut that fastens this cooler down to the frame rail. And once we get that 10mm nut off, we can just kind of pick this up off the bracket and move it slightly behind that bracket, just to give us a little bit more room to pivot the radiator. Now we're going to move on to these bracket covers on the side here. They are going to be a little bit finicky, so bear with me. There's a series of clips that we're going to do our best to show you guys at home. So you're going to need to push the center of it in while pulling the trim panel out. And it may even be a little bit easier if you get underneath it. This pick is a little too large. You get underneath here and pry the clip out like that. And sliding it forward towards the front of the car. Once we do that, it still doesn't exactly come out. That's a lot easier than it normally does. There is a clip on the bottom here, and then these little hooks right here sit on top of the radiator, and I'll show you that in a little bit later. But once you pivot this top section out, the center section, this peg, this should just be an upward motion to get that to pop out of that little groove. Now there's a similar trim panel on this side, and then once this one comes loose, it is a little bit more tricky to get out, as it does hook around the side of the radiator. There is a coupler here for the low temperature circuit in the radiator, so you will fight this a little bit if you don't go forward first. So keep that in mind while you're struggling with that piece. Now on either side of the radiator, front of the low temp circuit, there is this guard right here. There's going to be 2 tabs on either side that you'll need to pull forward, and while pulling them forward, pivot this upwards. You're going to do the same thing on the other side, pulling the tab forward and pulling the entire bracket up and away. This whole transcooler needs to shift towards the driver's side, and there is not much room to do so. All right, once you get it released, it is just kind of gonna hang out right there. But as you can see, we've separated it from the high temperature circuit and the low temp circuit. It is still kind of connected over here, so we may have to fight around with that one. But let's go back to those tabs on the top here and see if we can get this low temp out. There are 2 tabs on either side of the top of the radiator that connect the high temperature circuit to the low temperature circuit. So if we just push down right here and twist a pick in there, separating the 2 radiators apart, you'll see there's a little lip there that'll engage on the high temperature circuit. So we'll do the same thing on this one. You may even be able to squeeze it with your thumb and pulling that away. And it's just going to give us just enough room to flex that forward and back. And actually we'll re-engage those because we're going to need to get this transcooler loosened up first. So now that we've got a lot more mobility in here, we're going to transition down to the bottom and release that coolant hose on the passenger side of the low temperature circuit. It is visible from up here, but the clip is actually facing the ground, so we'll have to go down underneath to get that loosened up. So this next hose is a little bit difficult to show you guys. However, it is this hose that runs along the frame rail and kind of wraps up and around the low temp circuit. So we'll be releasing this, and it does attach on the side here. You're going to need something a little bit longer than your typical pick and pull the clip out of the way, similar to the rest of the coolant hoses we've been dealing with here. Now, very carefully, since I can't fit my hand up there, I'm going to try to pry this off without damaging the flange. Oh! All right, now that we've got everything loosened up, we've got all the coolant hoses off, we're gonna just kind of shimmy this low temp circuit out and away. Oh. And I would like to mention that there is a series of hooks down here which are a little bit of a mess to get out, but this hook right here is where it's going to be fed into the radiator. This is where your transcooler is gonna sit, as well as up here. So it is a series of pivoting and hooking and turning and a lot of that. So be mindful, it's not going to just slide right out. Now before we go on back to the bottom and release the lower radiator mounts, there is one more small hose for the low temp circuit that cycles back into the high temp radiator. So we're just going to unclip that. We've just got the radiator mounts on the bottom holding it in. So we're going to get the car up one more time and we'll pull the radiator out through the bottom. We've got a T30 on an electric ratchet because they're really not going to be able to swing much up there. And it's kind of hard to show you guys, but the T30 is mounted kind of submerged in that mount. Once the T30 is loose, the bracket will stay there. It does have a little bit of a hook that holds it up on the frame rail, and we're gonna do the same thing on the other side. Now the radiator should go up, and then it'll come forward a little bit, and then should drop down. Keep in mind that transcooler that we slid off of the low temp circuit is gonna be resting up here, so you may need to keep a hand on that as well. Now we're ready to assemble our radiator. So the new mounts that do come in the kit we've provided are going to be crucial in the installation. There is a little bit of a hook on the back, although you can only install them in one direction. You can certainly put them on facing the wrong way with the hook facing forward. So keep in mind that that hook will be going towards the coolant outlets, making sure that the bolt is towards the bottom of the radiator. Slide them on, just like that. If you are replacing your radiator and not replacing your mounts, something to keep in mind when you're going to swap the mounts from the old radiator to your new unit is that you can see in this area where on the old ones it may be compressed, that will actually keep your radiator in a slightly lower position, making the radiator hoses a little bit more susceptible to getting nicked by the fans. So keep that in mind. If you're just replacing your radiator, it would be very wise to install some new mounts at the same time. All right, once we have those slid on there, one more thing we got to talk about is there is a additional cap, if you will, that will be mounted on the top position on the back side of the radiator. We do have a lot of plugs here. The low temp circuit does go through the main radiator. However, on the top portion by the driver's side headlight, we will be installing this cap. You can put a little bit of silicone to make installation a little bit easier. It is keyed in a certain fashion that it will not allow you to install it upside down. Once you hear that nice click engagement, you know that's taken care of. Now with a 90-degree pick, we're gonna go ahead and release the connection for the auxiliary water pump, as well as the lower radiator hose to the water pump. You'll also notice that there is a clip here on the charge air pipe. We'll have to be careful not to snap that. On this clip, don't just go ahead and pry at it. You do have to kind of squeeze it together in order to get it to release. If you go prying at it, you're more than likely just gonna snap that clip. On the auxiliary pump, the clip is gonna be more or less underneath the hose. Pull that down, and careful not to lose that clip. Those are definitely handy to have if you're replacing that hose. Save that clip. So let's get this coolant hose fully drained. The more coolant you get out of here now, the less likely you're going to get coolant on your belt. And if you're concerned about getting any coolant on your belt, we do have a full DIY on the belt and tensioner replacement. So let's try not to get any coolant on there. On the lower radiator hose at the water pump connection, use the 90-degree pick to disengage that. This one may be a little bit stiffer, but simply just wiggle that off and drain that hose. Now these hoses don't look deformed or anything. However, the seals inside of each end of these are not replaceable separately. That is why we're going ahead and replacing the entire hose. With the new radiator, you're more than likely going to create a leak down the road with this old seal in there. So it is wise to go ahead and replace both upper and lower radiator hoses. And now for your new hose, the clips will all be installed already in the resting position. So go ahead and take a little bit of coolant and lubricate the O-rings on either end of that, as well as the auxiliary water pump, making sure that those seals don't roll on installation. I'm going to go ahead and put the water pump on first. It is keyed, so you can line up the keyway with the water pump coupler and click it into place. Get our connection on the charge pipe here. And then we'll go ahead and reattach that auxiliary water pump. There we go. Get this engine cover off. It just kind of pops off the grommets. Same thing with the DME cover. Pops it up off these three little pegs right here. And then this junction of wiring. So there is a provision down here that's kind of hard to show you. You need to kind of push up this little tab and get this harness loosened up. And then we'll have a wiring harness over here to a dead connector, which will have a small tab on the back there. And we'll just start releasing some of these connectors. We've already got our battery disconnected, so this is safe to do. Could obviously do some damage if you don't disconnect your battery when you're taking off these connectors. Now we can go ahead and release the tabs on the back here, just pulling those backwards. Slide your DME out and place this in a safe spot aside from the vehicle. So we do still have a couple of wire harness connections back here. You just need to pull up on those. That one back here. This has the battery positive connection that sits inside the cowl here. So I'm going to pull this behind this fuel line, tuck it up here. And we have one more connection up here. And that just about takes care of the wire harness in here. There is a small connection in the back here, which has two little thumb clips. You'll need to slide this up and release, just pushing these towards the engine and sliding that out of the bracket. And there's one more of those with this last little thumb clip. Once you get that released, there is another connection up here, and there's one more connector that's fixed to the box. It's going to be a little bit easier if you release these two 10s, picking this up, and then you'll be able to get this connector off much easier. So two 10mm bolts, and we're almost at that hose. Now we're just going to lift this up. And honestly, you could just simply flop this out of your way. Even though we do have the DME removed, we still can't exactly see that clip, but it'll make it a lot easier to go from this direction rather than going around the oil filter housing and under the intake manifold. All right, as with every belly pan on this car, about 20 8mm screws, so let's go ahead and take those out. All right, now that we have that belly pan out of the way, go ahead and reposition your drain pan towards the driver's side rear of the subframe, as once we get that coolant hose out of there, it's probably going to be dripping in this general area. And even furthermore, you could continue to take this belly pan off. As you can see, we did get a little coolant on there previously that we'll probably have to clean up, but this should be enough to get that hose off. There shouldn't be too much coolant left in there. As I have the new one here to show you exactly the orientation, this is where it's going to connect to the radiator, and if we recall, that was pointing straight up and down. That will put the rear position kind of at your 5 o'clock when you're staring at it from the driver's side fender. With that, I'm going to probably take a screwdriver and blindly try to pick at this clip and try to release that, putting it into its unlocked position, and then taking that off. Keep in mind, it's probably going to be a little bit difficult to see. You may have to stick your hand under there and guide your screwdriver into that little clip there. And oh, there it goes. So once you get that unlocked, there will certainly be a little coolant left in there. And then we're going to fish this out through the front here. Now for the new hose. So there is a little bit of coolant in that outlet flange that's sticking out. Take a little of the coolant, soak that O-ring. Same thing on the front while we have it out. And then just like we took it out, we're going to feed it under the throttle body, side of the air conditioning hose. And there we go. And then before we do anything up here, click that onto the heat management module outlet flange. And then if you recall, this lower hose sat in this provision down here. And then this one pops right into the throttle body like that. Let's go ahead and stick the main radiator in, making sure that our mounts are still on the sides. This is gonna have much more clearance. Still gonna have to fumble with the transmission cooler. Okay, that one's hooked and that one's hooked. So we're gonna leave these in place like that. Go ahead and grab those two new T30s in the kit and we'll get ready to install those now. Since these holes are kind of blind, I'm gonna take a little screwdriver and go through the bracket and try to line up the radiator bracket to make sure that we don't have any troubles. It should be somewhat centered. This one looks a little crooked, but it should be all right. Just use my hand to get this one started. Again, with those being blind, you don't want to cross thread them or anything, so be careful. It does go into aluminum. Do the same thing on this one. Make sure you don't cross thread anything. All right, I'm just gonna run these in real quick before torquing them down to 10 Newton meters. Now that we've got that taken care of, we're gonna bring the car back down. I know, a lot of up and down this whole time, but the low temp, if you recall, is fed in from the top, and the main radiator is fed in from the bottom. So make sure that before you go any further, once we go to the top, you come back down here and make sure that it is hooked into both of those provisions in the bottom of the main radiator. Keeping the high temp kind of pushed back at an angle towards the engine, and sandwich it in there. Careful not to drag it down the front of the new radiator. And honestly, if you don't have it lined up in the bottom there, these clips will not line up. So do not force those clips. Don't try to stress that. If the clips don't line up, the hooks are not lined up. But let's go back underneath and take a look and see if it is hooked into the main radiator. So we can see this one is hooked into the radiator nice here. Those are overlapping. It's not on the outside. The top piece here is the low temp radiator, and then this bottom section is the main high temp radiator. Now that we have both of our radiators in, everything's lined up, we need to kind of slide back that transmission cooler into place. If you recall, it was slid in from the driver's side into the passenger side, so you're gonna have to try to push it back towards the driver's side, giving yourself a little bit of slack and lining up the pegs. And just like the installation of the auxiliary radiator, make sure that the transmission cooler is slid into all the provisions. There's a little hook on the driver's side at the bottom of the radiator to make sure that that is slid back into place as well. But now that we've got that fitted, before we go put our fans in or any of those pesky trim panels, I'm gonna pop on the rest of the coolant hoses and we're gonna start pressure testing the system before we get any further in reassembly. And then the coolant hose that goes across the front of the engine here from the low temp circuit and the little cooler down here is gonna also go on the side. Make sure you have that clip in place, lock that on. Really make sure these are secured. Give it a little tug, but now we'll go ahead and make sure that that lower radiator hose is secured as well. So this one's a little tricky and you want to be careful if you're using pry tools as it is plastic, but once you get this fitting lined up, you should be able to click it into place. And that pretty much takes care of all of the coolant hoses. We've reconnected everything, so before we go and put anything else back together, let's test the cooling system and make sure we have no leaks. In doing a little coolant system test, we are also going to fill the cooling system. So if the vacuum test passes, go ahead and have your coolant ready. As I stated in the beginning, the 1 gallon of coolant will make 2, but you may need a little bit more than 2 gallons as we are going to be refilling both circuits here. With the U-View cooling filling device that we're going to be using today, we're going to start on the main coolant circuit and then we'll move over to the low temp circuit. I've got a bucket here with about 2 gallons, a little bit more than 2 gallons of concentrate and about 2 gallons of distilled water. With your line closed to start, let's see if we build any vacuum. Now that it's holding vacuum, obviously if any of our coolant connections were leaking or anything like that, we probably wouldn't be able to build that much vacuum. However, it is definitely advised to still let this thing sit for a couple of minutes and look around, make sure that none of your hoses are hissing or anything like that, but also monitoring the amount of vacuum that you've pulled and making sure that that doesn't drop down over a period of time. Looks like the high temperature circuit is still all holding well, so let's go ahead and fill it with coolant. Make sure your line is submerged in your bucket. That cooling system's filled up. Let's do the same thing on the low temperature circuit. So we're gonna leave that just a little bit above the max line, just in case there's a little bit of an air pocket once we go through the bleed procedure. However, let's go ahead and start putting this all back together. Get these out of here. We'll start with the DME, getting those connectors reassembled, and then we'll continue back onto the front. Now that we're ready to put our DME bracket back into place, keep in mind the bottom of the bracket does have this post that will have to be fed into a little provision down in the frame rail. And if the post does not line up, there's a good chance that the hardware up top will not line up. So keep that in mind. And then there's a little provision on the strut tower where there's a little centering peg that'll help you line that bracket up as well. All right, with those 10mm screws, you're gonna want to tighten these up to 8 Newton meters. Now we've got that resecured, we can start putting everything back together. Let's grab the DME and slide that back into place. Once that's back in place, we can start putting our connectors back on. But once we get that taken care of, we can go ahead and put that cover back on. and put that engine cover back on. Keep going with this DIY. Probably going to be the more difficult part of this job, refitting these silly little side shields. Making sure that we get this trim panel past that coolant hose on the low temp circuit and still stuck into these clips, while making sure that we don't break these pins on the bottom is a lot easier said than done. So hang tight and let's get these things in here. And once you have that in place, make sure that it clicks into the side of the radiator right there and it can't come out. It's definitely gonna cut your arms up a little bit trying to fit it in there. You may even have to support it with a piece of wood like I have here to keep that pushed back while you kind of get that in front of that radiator. Hopefully this one's not going to be as difficult, but let's move on to the side. Now this side has some additional pegs on the bottom aside from the clip on the top, and then an additional one up here. So fitment is similar but a little bit different. We also have the transmission cooler down on this side as well, looping down and around. So be careful you don't break any of these pegs going down and installing that. Continuing with many shrouds and trim panels, let's go ahead and put this rock guard in. So the clips will be facing upwards, if you will. The posts will be on the bottom, and the release for the tab will be kind of facing towards the front of the car. So you'll drop this down the front, making sure that you catch posts on the bottom on each side. And if those posts are lined up, everything should click into place. There we go. Now this top piece, you'll have a clip in the center, you'll have a clip off to the passenger side, and the driver's side you'll have to line up with that side trim that we fed down the side of the radiator. So pushing the radiator back slightly, you will line up that center clip to be clipped onto the main radiator. This one should fall into place right there. That one there, and then on this side you'll have to line up that clip and make sure that engages as well. So we're 3/4 of the way there. You could certainly go ahead and drop your fans in from this point, but we want to make sure that we have all these covers installed and lined up correctly before we go any further and have to disassemble. So we'll put the car up in the air and get that lower trim lined up, making sure that those two side trims are going to go into the correct provisions in that lower piece. When we're going to continue on the shrouds around the radiator, obviously we want to make sure that the ones that we inserted are in the correct position. If not, you will not be able to line up the provisions in this lower cowl. So make sure the side trim on the passenger side has these two pegs sticking down, and you'll be putting the locking tabs into this provision right here. Make sure that you've cleaned out any dirt and debris. Ours had a lot of sand and leaves and stuff caked in there. It's going to make it a lot easier to install if this is nice and cleaned out. The transmission cooler is fed into the front of the low temp radiator. The low temp radiator is fed into the high temp radiator. And just above that, this right here is our trim that hooks around the low temp radiator. There's a little like notch where that will catch on there. So if this is not fed in there, the lower trim will not line up. A lot of times when you go to put this in here, you do have to line this up before you finally secure it. Otherwise, this will be over here and your lower trim will not line up. So make sure that's all in place and all pretty much as you see it here. Otherwise, that lower trim will not engage for you. So I'm going to pull this back, get that out, and we'll go ahead and reinstall that lower cowl. Click that one into place and you'll watch those tabs engage. Check to see that side trim is fully seated as well. There's another clip there, and then finally over here. Once you make sure those pegs of that side trim are engaged, this one should click into place as well. Now we've got all of those side trims and top trims and bottom trims and all the cowling for the radiator secured, making sure that nothing's popped out of place when we push that one in from the bottom. Everything seems to be secured. So we're going to keep going and get ready to put the radiator shroud back in. But if you did have this auxiliary cooler, we're going to need to put that back on the stand. So we're just going to pull up on it, trying to guide the bottom into the bushings underneath the frame rail, making sure those line up before pushing the stud on here. All right, down she goes. And then the fastener is going to go on. It's a 10mm. All right, pull our hood cable up out of here and get ready to slide our radiator fans back into place. So make sure all your hoses are kind of up out of the way and that should drop right in there. When you grab your fans, keep in mind that these two tabs on the bottom do go into receiving notches in the radiator. So you kind of have to keep it snugged against the radiator, tipped towards the front of the car when you drop it in. So use another hand to keep that radiator hose out of the way and guide it on down. All right, and if everything lines up correctly, it should drop right into the clips in the new radiator and clip all into place. Make sure that on the bottom side that you did receive those pegs into the radiator, and get ready to start putting your hoses back into the respective positions. This one will clip right into the top here. The line right here does go to that top strut brace here. We do have this wire harness we're gonna have to drop down underneath here, and these will go to that bar as well. So we'll get this plugged in, make sure that engages. You have the coolant temp sensor here, lock that in place. The harness will clip into the fan here as well, and we'll save that for the cross brace. Once you get the radiator fans in the radiator, we do have one more hose here we want to attach. Make sure it doesn't get stuck in the fans, so make sure that is pressed in, or if you've opened that clip, just re-secure that clip in there. And one more, we need to get this one lined up. My hands are too big. There we go. All right, now all the radiator hoses are secured. Now we're gonna get ready to install the intake boot. So if you did take the clip out, we're gonna have the little tangs facing the intake boot and stretch it around, making sure that all locks into place. And it should look something like this with these three little notches sticking inside of there. And if you recall, we do have that breather pipe we need to attach, so it would be helpful to have a little bit of oil in that area, which the pipe has done for us already. So we're going to feed this down around here. This is going to have to get fed on. Get that seated on there. All right, it's kind of difficult to see, but once that fully engages, both sides of that little breather pipe will engage and click into place. And we just have a harness that we need to clip into place down here. Making sure this is nice and secured, give that a couple of tugs and get that back up into position. We do have this mass airflow sensor harness we're going to connect here in a second, so keep that handy. And you do have a couple of provisions for the coolant hoses to rest, and that will ensure you're in the correct place as well. Coolant hoses will fall right into those white markings on the hoses and lay right into that intake pipe. It's not really going to like clip in, it's just going to kind of rest in that position. All right, let's grab our air box and we'll get ready to put that in too. Make sure your pegs for your air box are intact, they haven't broken off. Could put a little bit of grease. We've had this thing out a couple of times, so those bushings are fairly greased. And one more thing, if the bushings have come out with the airbox, make sure that they're pressed into the provisions in the body before dropping this in. Go ahead, and we'll be trying to engage this as well, so keep that in mind. When you drop the pegs in, everything should line up all together. You may have to pull the boot out slightly, check, see if those pegs are lining up, and the airbox in front all should kind of fall in place together. And you can pull the boot up. Just careful not to roll the bottom of this boot on the airbox. It does have a tendency of doing so. Go ahead and engage that mass airflow sensor. We have a T20 on the back here, and there's a 6mm or a flathead to tighten that clamp up. So T20 torque screw in the back here. We're going to do this one first, as it'll kind of assist in the clocking of the front boot on the inlet of the airbox. So make sure that this notch lines up in that boot. You don't have to go crazy on this clamp. The torque spec's like 2.5 Newton meters. I'm just going to snug it down by hand, make sure it's fully seated, checking the top and bottom of that, ensuring that it hasn't rolled, and that's all good. Give it a slap, make sure it's good. And we'll drop that engine cover back on. We're done here. Go ahead and grab your upper radiator brace, drop this in place underneath the hood cables. And it does have little dowels on these front hood latches that it will lock into on the driver's side. Before we put our new bolts in, we are going to just leave this somewhat loose so we can get the harness and hoses clipped into place. So you do have this clip here that's going to go into a hole right underneath, like that. And then we have the harness over here as well. Find it and line it up. Over there. And that one as well. That takes care of everything on this side. We do still have the headlight harness over here, where you have another tab right here into the bottom down below. Kind of have to feel around for it, but it does fall into one respective spot. Once we get that all done up, 2 new bolts in either side, and all right, we're going to bring these almost to tight so it's still loose, and we're going to snug these up. If you tighten the ones on the frame rail before tightening these up, you may have a bit of a gap, and you could start to stretch the metal for the hood latches. So I've sunk one of these down here, and it's still loose but not all the way tight. We're just going to bring these down just until they touch, and we're going to tighten up these front ones first. We're going to put these T30s in, and we're going to be torquing these to 8 Newton meters. And once you get those snugged up, that will pull that radiator support as far forward as it possibly can go. Now we'll go back to the E14s, torquing those down first to 56 Newton meters, then to the final 90. So before we go ahead and put that radiator cover on, there are 2 bushings we need to transfer from the old radiator. They don't wear out very much. They don't really support too much other than the radiator, just forward and back motion. So once you remove these, they do have 2 tabs on either side, and they are fairly malleable. So you can kind of squeeze them and just pull them out of the old radiator, and tipping in those little tabs, making sure these are recessed into the top of the radiator. Once those are transferred over, we can go ahead and put that cover on. This is going to go underneath our hood cable. The pegs of the cover are going to drop right into those rubber bushings that we just installed. Next, we're going to grab the T30 Torx bolts and tighten these up to 11.8 Newton meters. And once you've gone all the way around, make sure they're all tight, we're going to put the hood cable into the little clips up here. Make sure that's all good there. So first step in the plastic trims, we're going to start with the ones that run down the top of the fender. Keep in mind there are a couple of pegs in here you have to kind of align in the back of the fender. We will have to tip this up quite a bit to get that to all line up and drop in correctly. So these are going to sit just like that. This hood seal does have a couple of clips that will go into these front pieces. And then a couple more of the plastic rivets. All right, make sure all those are secured, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Just keep in mind you do have the hood cable over here, so we'll have to keep that pulled up out of the way so that it doesn't get hidden underneath. Like on the passenger side, it's going to kind of tip into the back here. These are going to drop in place in the top cowl. There's a little lip that needs to catch into the wiper cowl, so guide that into place. And yours should have a little 90-degree thumb screw that should be there. Ours is missing. Similar to the driver's side, this one's going to have 2 tabs that are going to click into the cowl. And for the strut braces, the flat edge is going to face the front, and then the curved edge is going to face the rear of the car. The 16mm and the E14 are going to be torqued to 56 Newton meters. There we go, got it. All right, we're just going to put these back on, start getting rid of some of these 8mm screws we have everywhere. All right, now that we have all our belly pans on, obviously take the car out for a test drive, monitor your coolant level, making sure that everything is copacetic, make sure your temperature doesn't rise, coolant fans are coming on and you have no leaks, and once the car cools down, you can adjust your coolant level. But that pretty much takes care of everything on this DIY. So if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to hit that like button. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop down in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe because we will have plenty more videos on this vehicle and many others like it. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.